Well, I would submit that this is too important an issue for games, and it's not about a war. What they did next was to hire a new scientist to discredit lie and sing. They hired Jerry Phillips under a contract for Motorola and the U.S. Department of Energy. But there was a little bit of a problem. Phillips showed that lie and sing were right. And Phillips, lie and sing no longer work in this field. Their funding dried up. That's one way that we have a disconnect between science and what we think about cell phones. Now, that research that I showed you at the University of Vienna with the elegant studies of the Comet assay of DNA damage, those nice little circles, that was done by investigators at the University of Vienna, and they were charged with fraud. A Vienna study was headlined around the world, Science magazine, fraud admitted. The provost of the university went very quickly to admit, yes, we're wrong, we better withdraw the study, and he even asked the researchers to destroy their data, which made Franz Edelkofer, the man I just read to you about, very suspicious. Well, it takes a long time, but eventually, often, truth will out. Just this month, the Austrian university and court rulings declared that the fraud itself was a fraud. But the damage has been done. Those investigators lost all their funding while they were being accused of fraud. So the research has not gone forward, and I would submit it's a very important question that we need more answers to at this point. So now the advice. How do you protect your family? France, Finland, Israel, and on our website you can find more than 12 different countries all say these are the things you can do to reduce radio frequency radiation. And the advice is pretty simple. Use a speakerphone, use earpieces, do not keep the phone on your body, and don't use it in areas of weak signals. We need to limit children's use of phones next to the brain. Texting is okay. Now, this is what happened in France in 2008. Billboards. This is what we need to see in the United States as well. It says, le portable avant 12 ans, c'est non. Cell phones before 12 years of age is no. No way. Let's keep them healthy away from mobile phones. That's what the French did, and now the French government has passed restrictions on cell phones out of both houses, banning advertising to children under 12, banning the design of phones to be used by those under 6. And handsets have to be sold with all phones in France. You don't have to go out and buy them so you can lose them again, as we all do anyhow. And an official campaign to discourage the use of phones by children carried out by the city of Lyon. The President's Cancer Panel, and this was President George W. Bush's panel, issued a report recently that said the true burden of environmentally induced cancers has been grossly underestimated and recommended long-term monitoring and quantification of electromagnetic energy exposures related to cell phones and wireless technologies. And that is the same advice that the National Academy of Sciences issued on this subject. So we have lots of advice. We have a full research program that Dr. Herverman and I have developed at an expert conference that we've testified before the House and the Senate about. But there's no shortage of ideas. There's a shortage of public will and understanding of the problem. And that's why I wrote this book. I'm concerned about the marketing that's taking place in our country to 5-year-olds. 5-year-olds. 5-year-olds need their parents. If they are in an emergency, I don't think a cell phone is going to be helping them. Now let's look at what other kinds of ads in past times we've had to deal with. Believe it or not, this was an actual ad using babies to promote smoking. Before you scold me, Mom, maybe you'd better light up a Marlboro. This was another ad promoting cigarettes. And you remember that sports heroes and physicians were boasting that it was okay to smoke. It was a good idea for a while. Well, now I want to raise another issue. We know now that the smoking forces made good use of disinformation. And the book, Thank You for Smoking, made into a movie, included the story of some people who had a difficult job. They had to sell people on smoking, guns, and alcohol. They got together once a week for lunch. They called themselves the Mod Squad. Mod stood for Merchants of Death. All right? And in the last scene of the movie is quite interesting. This is the last scene verbatim. Gentlemen, he has some new clients before him. They are looking uncomfortable. Practice these words in front of the mirror. Although we are constantly exploring the subject, currently there is no direct evidence that links cell phone usage to brain cancer. Now, that was in a dark comedy written by a brilliant writer. This is this current response. This is what the cell phone industry said in 1993 about the possible dangers of cell phone radiation. More than 10,000 studies show that cell phones are safe. There were not 10,000 studies then. In fact, there are fewer than 1,000 studies on cell phone radiation, according to the German government resource that I cite here. Calling for research becomes an excuse not to change policy. Fast forward to 2010, and the Golden Gate opens, as I write in my book. San Francisco's mayor proposed a really radical idea. You should have the ability to find out how much radiation your cell phone emits before you buy it, instead of after. It's called the right to know. Well, the CTIA objects and has filed a lawsuit against the city for trying to do this, saying it's going to confuse people. I'm honored to have Representative Boland here today because she's the woman who first put this issue on the map for the country by proposing warning labels on cell phones in the state of Maine. At that hearing that was held by the state of Maine, when asked why fine print warnings come with phones now, CTIA Vice President Dane Snowden replied, "We'll get back to you." Mr. Snowden, it's 6 months later, and we want to know the answer. But I think I can give you a little clue. I know you can't see this very well, but I want to show you the size of the print. That's the fine print warning. That's my book. This is what it says. I don't think you can read it in the back, so let me read it to you. iPhone's SAR measurements, that's the radiation measurement, may exceed the FCC exposure guidelines for body-worn operation if positioned less than 15 millimeters, that's 5/8 of an inch, from the body, e.g. when carrying iPhone in your pocket. Well, you guys, I think we're going to see a new style for man bags or fanny packs because the iPhone is telling you you can't safely keep it in your pocket. And I think that that's good advice. And I don't think we have to wait for the CTIA to tell us. This is in all of the new smartphones. And our website includes all of these fine print warnings, so you can find them there. This is what was yesterday's Washington Post. Warning labels on cell phones proposed by the Secretary of Transportation to reduce distracted driving deaths and accidents. And every day there's a new horror story. A surgeon in People magazine went off the cliff while tweeting and died. There are incredible stories of the arrogance of people. Everyone thinks he's above average. Everyone thinks, it'll never happen to me. I'm in control. I know what I'm doing. Well, the short-term impacts of cell phones, we are already seeing legislation in 20 states about this, okay, on distracted driving, which is like driving drunk. But the long-term impacts of cell phones on our health is something that Representative Boland and growing numbers of people are concerned about. The mayor and town council of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, have declared October Cell Phone Safety Awareness Month. We've got a business campaign for safer cell phones. I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce of Jackson Hole, and many of my colleagues who are members of the Chamber are joining in providing free headsets to all their employees who use a cell phone for business. Numbers of universities are doing that as well. The campaign for safer cell phones is what I invite you to join. We describe it in this book, and the advice is very simple. The world is not dangerous because of those who do harm, but because of those who look at it without doing anything. Now I'm going to read just one final passage from my book. On one of the last mornings I was finishing up the writing of this book, 3 young men phoned me on a conference call, excited about what they had invented. They're not brain scientists, but businessmen. One has a fresh doctorate in applied mathematics, and another is an attorney. One is the first person in his family to go to college. They hail from my hometown region in the Monongahela Valley of western Pennsylvania. I imagine some very proud parents. Quote, "When I was doing my doctoral research at MIT, I figured out there's got to be a way to reduce the amount of radiation going into the brain and out of the phone by using some secret materials that I can't tell you about," Jeff, the mathematician, informed me. Jeff played football for a major Ivy League school before he got out, before getting badly hurt. he had developed headaches that wouldn't go away with his cell phone until he started to use an earpiece. Could be a coincidence, but he doesn't think so. So he began talking to the others about how to make a better, safer phone. Quote, "We figure that it can't be good for you to hold a microwave radio next to your brain. We know that cell phones are revolutionary and that they are here to stay. We are going to make them safer. Our invention will reduce radiation into the head and increase the amount going out." Others are already working on redesigning phones with different antennas. Despite our growing dependency on phones for many functions of our daily lives, it makes no sense to continue assuming that today's phones are safe based on standards that were created for big guys who didn't use them very much when current technologies did not exist. One thing is clear at this point: cell phones have become as essential to modern life as cars and trucks and jet planes. We spend billions to make vehicles safer for us to drive or fly. We need to do the same thing with cell phones. Rather than parroting assurances of safety based on old science, outmoded theories of physics, and bullied scientists, we need to invest in cell phone safety as we do with other modern technologies. Of course, more research is needed. On that, we are all agreed. But the need for research should not be allowed to become an excuse to carry on as though everything is fine until we have incontrovertible proof that it is not. Yes, we do not have an epidemic of brain tumors in countries that have used cell phones heavily for little more than a decade. But 10 years after cigarettes began to be heavily smoked, we also did not have an epidemic of lung cancer. Years from now, our grandchildren will look back and ask, did we do the right thing and act to protect them, or did we harm them needlessly, irresponsibly, and permanently blinded by the addictive delights of our technological age? I have to say I'm very grateful to Dr. Herbermann, who brought me to Pittsburgh to set up the Center for Environmental Oncology. He is no longer there, nor am I. We are working on environmental health trust because we think we face a potential global public health catastrophe that can be averted by taking simple steps, that the science tells us that there's a problem and we would be foolish to ignore that science. Dr. Herbermann is a very distinguished cancer researcher who is now working in immunology and biotech and is here to make a few remarks now to expand on what we have done there at the center and what he's doing now. Thank you.
I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to say a few words, just essentially to echo what Devra Davis has so eloquently explained to you. She told me about 2.5 years or so ago, when we were both at the University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute, that she was concerned about the health effects of. When she did that, I was really very skeptical, and I said, well, you know, aren't there more things that we need to be concerned about than cell phones? But she said, you know, you really should look into it. And I had the opportunity to meet one of the leaders from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, who told me that he had looked into it and was involved in a panel to examine some of the epidemiologic data, and felt that there was really something to it. And that particularly propelled me to begin to examine the information. And the more that I read about it, the more concern that I had. Not that there was compelling or conclusive evidence, but there were a number of hints that were disturbing.